allowances for people to have a second job, aren't there?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, MPs weren't actually paid until 1911 because they were just assumed to have outside income that would keep them going. And I think, hundreds of years ago, perhaps it was appropriate when, being an MP wasn't really a full-time job. You were simply a representative. But, now I think there's a real question over, whether MPs should be allowed second jobs and even what type of second jobs they should be allowed. Because, as you mentioned, plenty of MPs are, serving doctors and nurses, which has particularly, come as importance, during the pandemic. But I think, there is a distinction here between sort of serving a professional qualification and a public service like nursing or being a doctor, and being paid by private companies to basically do certain work that brings into question, who is the public representative actually serving. I think that's the real issue over here. I mean, I think, it is a major issue. It's not just a few MPs that do it. Since January last year, MPs have earned almost up to £10 million in outside jobs. Other than being constituency MPs. And I think there's a particular issue when you are actually earning more from your outside job than you are from being a public representative. Mm-hmm. And I think, when you have a situation where there are people living in poverty in every single constituency in the country, for some MPs to say, well, they actually have the spare time to be working for private companies, I think, there's a real issue here. I mean, I think, some parties like the Labour Party have actually taken it on themselves to basically introduce their own systems for their own MPs to say that they can't serve particular roles. So there's to some extent there's self-regulation, but I think at the moment there's no indication from the governing Conservative Party that we're going to see any kind of major change to the current system that enables second jobs.
There's the opposition has seen a chink in the armour, and they're going full pelt to make it as big as possible.
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, I think, the opposition see a real opportunity here to try to brand the Conservative Party as the party of corruption and the party of sleaze, which is sort of a label that's, come on and off the last few decades, really. But I think, one of the issues that the Labour Party might have is that, statistics have really shown that when one party is considered to be corrupt, the public don't simply just perceive MPs of that particular party to be corrupt. It's in fact the whole system that the public begin to kind of distrust. And I think that becomes quite a dangerous situation because, distrust in politics is really one of the most corrosive things that you can do for a democracy to within, because once you lose trust, it's very difficult to regain it. But also, people stop voting, you have lower participation rates, but also it creates fertile ground for extremists to essentially take advantage of the fact that mainstream parties are not trusted by political parties. By the public. Mm-hmm. So I think that the opposition really has to trend quite a fine line here to make sure that, it also doesn't get caught too much in the storm and kind of part of the reputation that it's trying to build up about the governing Conservative Party.
Where is this going to go in the coming days? Is there going to be a full review, and will the UK get back on track into a healthy way of working?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, it's good news that, within less than 24 hours of the government's motion going through to scrap the current system, that it had announced that it was actually no longer going to be going ahead with this. Part of the problem that the government has because it is a motion that the government has passed, it actually needs to formally undo that. Parliament is currently in recess until next week, so it will have to wait a few more days, which I suggest, I think it's probably quite convenient for them to try to handle this in a way that kind of provides minimal political damage to them. But I think, part of the issue is that, thanks to the government's kind of own incompetence, actually the question has been opened about, how do we proceed and how do we strengthen the system? And actually, if the government had simply allowed Owen Paterson to face his 30-day suspension, actually we probably wouldn't have been looking at the current situation, which is, major public discourse about what kind of changes to see. So I think the government will bring probably a new motion that will probably reach out to the government, to the opposition benches, to ask them for some support to create some kind of cross-party commission to look into this issue. But I wouldn't suggest it would go or predict that it would go far enough that it would fundamentally change the system that would ban second jobs. And I think generally that the UK's political system works is that it changes through kind of incremental changes. It generally doesn't have major, let's say, constitutional changes. We tend to change quite slowly. So I think we're probably just going to see the latest iteration of the UK's corruption regime.